All right, next one in line is our parts of an expression lesson. This is kind of breaking apart a problem into its different pieces. So our essential question is, why is it important to know terms, constants, and coefficients when simplifying expressions? So today is going to be about the vocabulary and identifying the pieces, because it's going to play right into our next lesson on simplifying. So first vocabulary term is term. It's the parts of an expression that are being added together. So here's our expression, 2x plus 13 minus 5x plus y minus 8. So two things to start with. Your subtraction, get rid of that subtraction. So this is really a negative 5 and a negative 8. Remember, we can only talk about terms when it's an addition problem. And anytime you have a lone variable all by itself, it really needs to have that 1 written in front of it. Y means I have one y. So always write in that imaginary 1 or that invisible 1 there for us. It's going to help us from making mistakes here as we get moving. But to find our terms, it's just each of the different pieces. You just make a list. 2x, 13, negative 5x, 1y, and negative 8. The terms are just each of the separate pieces in the problem once you've turned it all into addition. Like terms are terms that contain the same variable. So same idea, but now we're going to group things together by what they have in common. So I like to kind of circle mine and kind of use different notation to help me find my like terms. So anything with the same variable, so like 2x and negative 5x are like terms. So I'm going to list them together. Then I have 1y. Well, that has a different variable, so I'm going to leave it in its own little group. It's not the same as my x's. And then I have my 13 and my negative 8. Those are my plain old numbers. And those count as like terms because they don't have a variable. They have that in common. So like terms is when you kind of regroup all of the terms based on what they have in common. Anything with x's, anything with y's, anything that are just plain old numbers. Then we have constants. It's a term without a variable. I think of it as just a plain old number. So again, we want to make sure we've gotten rid of all of our addition. Our constants are our regular old numbers, no variables attached to them. So in this case, 13 and negative 8 are my constants. I always think of them as they're constantly boring. There's nothing else to them. It's just a plain number with no variable attached to it. And then our last vocabulary term is a coefficient. Coefficients are the numbers in front of the variable. It's the number part of a term that includes the variable. It's the number in front of the variable. So again, if I kind of change everything up, my 2, my negative 5, and my 1 are each of my coefficients. It's the number part in front of the variable. It's telling me how many x's or how many y's I have. So the coefficient is always in front of the variable. The constant is the plain old number without any variable there. So let's practice this a little bit. So we've got our expression here, negative 2w plus 7w plus 8 minus w plus 16. So first, get rid of that subtraction, make it adding the opposite. And then anytime you have a plain variable, make sure to put in that 1 to remind us that there's one w there. Your terms are just all of your pieces. So negative 2w, 7w, 8, negative 1w, and 16. Your like terms, now you're gathering them based on what they have in common. So in this case, put all of our w's together. Negative 2 and 7, negative 1. So negative 2w, 7w, and negative 1w. Those are like terms, so we group them together. And then I have my plain numbers, 18 and 16. Those are going to be a separate group, because those each have the fact that they don't have a variable in common. When you're listing your like terms, every term is going to show up in here somewhere. It just might be in its own little group or kind of separated from other ones depending on what it has in common. Now for my constants and my coefficients. Okay? Remember, constants are constantly boring. They're just plain old boring old numbers. So that would be my 8 and my 16. My coefficients are the numbers in front of the variables. It's telling me how many w's I have. So that's my negative 2 my 7, and my -1. When you list your coefficients, don't bring the variable with it. The coefficient is just the number part that's in front of the variable. If you think you got the hang of it, go ahead and try this one for yourself. Then hit play and see how I did. First thing I'm going to do is get rid of my subtractions, make it adding the opposites. My terms are just all of the pieces, 9y, -4, -11y, and 7. My like terms are anything that any of them that have the same variable in common. So my 9y and my -11y would be like terms. My -4 and my 7, they don't have a variable, so they have that in common. They're constantly boring. They're just plain old constants. Those are going to be another set of like terms. My constants, again, those are my plain numbers, -4 and 7. And then my coefficients are the numbers in front of my variables. In this case, 9 and -11. So constants are plain old numbers. Coefficients are the numbers in front of the variables. Last one. You should be an expert at it by now. Give this one a try and then see how you did. All right. So I would make this into adding the opposite and adding the opposite. My terms are just all the pieces, 3x, 2, -10, 6y, and -5x. When I go to like terms, now I'm going to take those exact same terms, but I'm going to start to group them together. So for instance, I'm going to put my 3x and my -5x together because they both have the same variable. I'm going to put my 2 and my -10 together because they're both plain numbers. But I'm also going to include the 6y. He's just going to be all by himself. There aren't any other terms that have y's in them, so I can't combine them with anything else, so it just stays 6y. My constants, those are my plain old, boring old numbers. That's my 2 and my -10. My coefficients are the numbers in front of my variables. So that would be my 3, my 6, and my -5. So 3, 6, and -5. Notice I didn't write the variables with them. I just wrote the numbers by themselves. All right, we'll put this to use tomorrow.